Okay, so the topic for today's Zoom is the war on drugs in quotation marks because after doing a bunch of research, I found that it was really a war on people of color. Um, and so that's why I have it in quotation marks there. But for the lineup today, we will have I'm just gonna read this little blurb about the war on drugs that I found in a book because I'm researching right now for a project on how the Black voice is lacking in politics and why, which is basically because it's been suppressed. So yeah, that book talks a little bit about it. It's called The New Jim Crow. I'm sure you guys have heard of it before. And then after me, we will have Serenity discussing the media side of the war on drugs, how they portrayed Black people. And then hopefully Tatiana can join us to add her last points. But if she can't, then I wanted to talk a little bit about the opioid epidemic and then show a 45-minute documentary on the CIA placing drugs into Black neighborhoods during the war on drugs. So I wanted to do that at the end in case people couldn't stay for that whole video. That's totally fine. And I'll put the link also so you guys can finish it later. But it's a video that Dr. O had showed in class. And so it really just captures everything that we're talking about today and shows how the CIA placed drugs into Black neighborhoods, but then went around and arrested a bunch of Black people for having these drugs. So yes, that's kind of like what's going to happen today. Did anybody have anything they wanted to talk about before we get into this discussion? Sorry, one sec. I'm going to mute myself so my dog isn't freaking out. All right, thank you guys. I'm going to go ahead and grab my book really quick. Sorry, I thought it was right here, but it's not. Okay, got it. So yeah, this is the book. I would really recommend it. I haven't finished it yet, but I've like sticky noted it up because it has a lot of important topics in it. But it has a little blurb about the war on drugs. So it says, the war on drugs is a vehicle through which extraordinary numbers of Black men are forced into the cage. The entrapment occurs in three distinct phases, each of which has been explored earlier, but a brief review is useful here. The first stage is the roundup. Vast numbers of people are swept into the criminal justice system by the police who conduct drug operations, primarily in poor communities of color. They are rewarded in cash through drug forfeiture laws and federal grant programs for rounding up as many people as possible, and they operate unconstrained by constitutional rules of procedure that once were considered inviolate. Police can stop, interrogate, and search anyone they choose for drug investigations, provided they get consent. Because there is no meaningful check on the exercise of police discretion, racial biases are granted free rein. In fact, police are allowed to rely on race as a factor in selecting whom to stop and search, even though people of color are no more likely to be guilty of drug crimes than whites, effectively guaranteeing that those who are swept into the system are primarily Black and brown. So yeah, that I felt like really captured like what they were trying to do with saying it was a war on drugs. It just kind of gave them like this power basically to be unchecked by the Constitution, which we've seen a lot. I feel like with our police force, they kind of get like special powers. They're supposed to be checked, but they oftentimes aren't. And they have like, I feel like that power can get to their head a lot of the time, which we see just the whole system of the police force like can just go unchecked basically. And so I think this was just another instance of that. They tried to disguise it as the war on drugs, but it was really a war on people of color. They tried to just, sorry, I'm getting notifications, mask the true, basically, goal of what they were doing. And so, the whole reason I thought of this topic was because I saw this documentary on Netflix called Grass is Greener. And that also talks about how the same thing kind of happened with weed. When weed first was coming, well, not first was coming out, but when it was first becoming popular, they would also put a lot of the Black population in jail for weed. And they made weed like a big deal. They tried to make it seem like it was like the devil's lettuce and like all of this stuff. But that's because a lot of people of color were smoking it. And we all know that there's still a lot of people in jail right now for weed, which should not be the case, because it's legal in so many places right now. But like that documentary, I would really recommend because it talks about the origins and again touches on this issue. People in Louisiana, for example, can get serious jail time for just being found with a joint, which was crazy to me because I went to Louisiana before and people are just walking around the streets smoking. So it's like a known thing that people smoke weed down there, but still, if a cop felt like it, he could arrest somebody and give them serious jail time for it. So yeah, that's another example, just the way that weed was treated at first. Now, obviously, it's more like everybody's into it, but you can for sure see the same kind of pattern with that. And so, yeah, that's really what I wanted to start off with, my thoughts on everything. And then, like I said, the documentary really touches on how our own government created this kind of system. So that's what I'm going to end with. Serenity, it's your time to shine with the media side.
Hello. I just wanted to share a couple quotes that I found from different kind of articles that talked about this. The title of this one is called, sorry, just had it. This one is called Exploring the Impact of the Opioid Epidemic in the Black and Hispanic Communities in the United States. It says, in contrast, the media portrays minorities as addicts instead of victims in comparison to their white counterparts. This phenomenon is evident not only in regards to opioid use, but also for abuse of other drugs such as methamphetamine. However, amongst the latest conversations regarding the opioid crisis and policy implications for harm reduction, the role of race is missing. Here's another one from Treatment versus Punishment, Understanding Racial Inequalities in Drug Policy. And these are research articles. This says to better understand these relationships, we also consider legislative responsiveness to deaths from methamphetamine, a drug predominantly used by whites, has generated less public sympathy than opioids, but has been portrayed less negatively than crack. The comparison to methamphetamine will help us better understand whether policy responses to opioid crisis have been different because its victims are stereotypically white or because they might have addictions that began with prescription drugs. And also screenshot of another one. It says, despite a growing body of research on moral panic theory, this framework has been largely inattentive to the role of race and class in the creation of moral panics over drug abuse. Using a content analysis of 124 newspaper articles, this study extends moral panic theory by examining whether the race and class of crack cocaine and methamphetamine users and traffickers shaped the print media's depiction of these drugs, and whether such depictions affected the official response. Findings reveal that media reports on crack cocaine frequently reference African Americans and depicted the drug in conjunction with violent crime. However, articles on methamphetamine were more likely to reference poor whites and associate this drug as a public health problem. And I kind of just wanted to read those articles, just kind of emphasize the difference in portrayal and how something is presented in the media, and how that kind of shapes how people view it or judge it. And I've heard a lot of times in kind of different songs that were going around during that time. My mom used to listen to Eminem a lot, and Eminem was always talking about kind of how drugs hitting middle class Americans, like when it hits middle class Americans, and then it's a mental health issue, then it's this and that. And that's when we start to make excuses for it. But when it happens to Black people, African American people, we blame it on them, and it's because it's a moral mishap or a lack of morals within the community. But like Rainice had talked about, this is just kind of another tactic to push blame onto Black people and African American people. And a lot of times when I think of media when it comes to African Americans and drugs, I go back to like the Boys in the Hood, kind of Menace to Society. Even those are great movies that those are great movies that I'm sure we all go back to, but I kind of look at the portrayal of like the Black mom in society, the poor Black mother, how she's hooked on drugs and that's the only thing she cares about, and But when it happens to a white family, it's because they have all these issues, and it is just never the difference in kind of internal and external blame has to do. You can kind of see it go to different ethnic communities, like what's appropriate for each one. And I would also say that, I'm trying to say, yeah, and really just the difference in, if we think about it, the real difference that people try to say is like crack versus cocaine, and they're really the same exact substance. So the logic just isn't there, you know. And addiction in itself, I'm working as a case manager in detox right now, and I can tell you that addiction, it doesn't discriminate. It goes to everybody, and it impacts everybody in the same ways that impacts one person the same way it would impact another person. They're all having experience the same withdrawal symptoms. They are all hurting their family in some capacity because they really can't abstain from using whatever the drug of choice is. It just comes down to that we're all people and humans, and we all struggle with things. And if we could kind of create some sort of acceptance with addiction, that would also be nice, because it's as much as people like to portray it as it is, it's not a choice. In my opinion, it is a disease, and but unfortunately it's been used as another way to kind of attach moral failure to a certain community, and that being Black people. That's kind of all I wanted to touch on, and see if anybody wanted to add on to that, or it made them think of anything that they're familiar with.
Thank you so much, Serenity. Yeah, did anyone have anything to add on to her points? No. Well, I had some things that popped up. Oh, Victor. Yes, sorry. You.
I was gonna say that because I've watched a lot of Gossip Girl recently, like the past few months, and it's kind of weird because it's like you see like all these like white like rich New York, like upper side people like using cocaine and stuff, and it's like no one really like touches on that in the show, and it's like it's overlooked. Like no one really brings that up when it's like shown in the show. But if it were to be like a different show with like people of color in it, they would have been like, oh yeah, like they use cocaine in that show and all that kind of stuff. Like they'd make it a big thing, you know. So that's what I really notice about like shows with like people that do cocaine. Like it really differs, and people touch on it more when it's someone with a darker skin tone. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like normalized almost. And it's like she said, it's the same substance, but crack is looked at as like this completely different, like evil thing. And also like with the different portrayals, same with like weed, once again, it's normalized now because like a lot of middle class white people like it. But when it wasn't like that, like, you know, it wasn't legalized how it is now. So I think it definitely shows like a pattern for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy because now when I feel like something tells me that dispensaries have something to do with that. Like now that middle class white Americans like it, now we can put out dispensaries and now it can be accessible. But when it's mostly like something that affects something that Black Americans use, and you have to go to it for a drug dealer, and it's just this bad thing. But now there's dispensaries like every 2 blocks from here. So
Literally, that's just like, it's crazy, the different approaches. And then also what comes to mind too is like a lot of these laws, they've like, our government has claimed that they're different now. Like, you know, they've shifted the language in them and like there's no more racist language in them. But a lot of these colorblind laws still have like the same effects as before. So it really shows for a lot of these things, we just need to completely rebuild, because although maybe there isn't out in the open racist language and this stuff anymore, structurally, it's still doing the same thing to our community. And yeah, that's the other thing I was going to add on too, the difference between like the opioid epidemic and the crack epidemic. Now we see police officers working with social workers and showing up to the scene and getting people help because of the opioid epidemic. But when it was the crack epidemic, we didn't get that same type of treatment. You know, people were rushed to jail instead. They didn't get help. So I definitely think, I'm not saying it's wrong that they're doing it better now, but I'm just saying it's wrong that they didn't take that approach when it was Black people that were having this problem, you know? So definitely big difference. Anybody else have anything to add to the points that were said?
what Victor said about kind of like the Gossip Girl, I remember that show and how they never say anything about it. And they kind of normalize it in that. I'd say that I noticed too, like going off of that, cocaine is like, I feel like cocaine is kind of normalized now in a way, which is crazy to me. But it's like, I feel like when drugs are associated with like wealth and high socioeconomic status, then it's like this cool, whatever. I don't know. I think of kind of like cocaine as like kind of like an upper that maybe higher class people use to kind of get themselves going. But when it's looked at that, it's okay technically, but and then they have the money to get themselves through and bail out and everything. And so it's kind of like it's not ethical to me. Like this person is kind of doing the same thing, but has a different outcome just because of their status and their race.
Yeah, I wanted to add because I was like, I know a couple of students that go to UW, and they're like, oh, there's these kids with like all this money, and then they like do cocaine, and it's like they don't look at it that way. But if it were to be like a different student, they'd be like, oh, they're wasting like their dream, their life. Like, why are they doing that? And I'm just like, because if my friends were to be the ones doing that, they'd be looked at differently. But when it's like this white girl with like a 4.0, or like this guy that's a varsity, this athlete, D1 athlete, like it's not looked down upon.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Victor and Serenity. Did anybody have anything else to add to what was said? I definitely agree. I feel like it's a class issue and a race issue. And then it's like a whole bigger system too, like just adding on to like, so they get us into jail because of this, right? And then systematically they take away our political voice. We're not able to vote because we have a felony. And like it just has all these different repercussions after you leave jail if you are able to. So it's just like crazy how it's all connected. And it's like people talk about things like they're supposed to be a conspiracy, but I feel like a lot of conspiracy is named conspiracy because we're on to something. I know some people be going crazy with conspiracies, but they try to name like this CIA stuff is out in the open. There's research done about it. Like there's documents proving everything, and still people say that it's a conspiracy. But this video shows how the government really planned this. Like they planned to get Black people in jail somehow, and they supplied our neighborhoods with drugs. And yeah, it's just really, it's not a conspiracy. It's crazy and it's out in the open. A lot of the stuff is, I'm starting to realize, I took like the medical apartheid class, and I'm hoping to have her as a guest speaker, maybe not next month, but the month after. And that's just really showed me that in all of our medical documents, sorry, got an email, in all of our medical documents, in the US, they're just like out in the open, and it shows how the medical system is built on the backs of Black people as well, but people like just can't see this stuff because I don't know, I think it's just easier for people to be ignorant to it sometimes, but it's definitely there, and it's something that like a lot of other things just built on the backs of Black people, I feel like. And so, yeah, any last thoughts before I show the little documentary that I'm talking about?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like when you're talking about conspiracy theories, I kind of stopped after I learned about the Tuskegee experiment with the when without consent or anything like that, they tested on Black men and giving them syphilis and like letting them die, basically. Like conspiracy theories, I feel like I don't doubt it. That's what I'm trying to say. Like if they can do that and kind of justify it and make it seem like it was okay, then I wouldn't doubt that they would do some of the other stuff that people talk about.
For sure. And like there was another thing I learned about, there's this group that everybody knows is crazy and kind of cult, like the Scientology, like religion. I think it's a religion. They actually are like really good at research, because I don't know, they're a cult, I guess. And we were like reading in the medical apartheid, people were trying to name this other thing as like a conspiracy too, because it was research done by a Scientology group, but they had actual receipts and everything that they had found to prove their claims. And it was basically about how the government, no, I think, it was the CIA again, was doing, they were practicing biological warfare, and they would release mosquitoes in like poor Black neighborhoods. And there was like receipts and stuff to prove this. And once again, it was named as like conspiracy because, it wasn't the most credible group that did the research. But when you really look at the receipts and like the documents and everything, they actually knew what they were talking about. And this is like a real thing. Like they were releasing mosquitoes and different things into Black neighborhoods to practice biological warfare.
I was gonna say, I love how you're using receipts. Like they pulling out the receipts. They did the research.
For real, they really did. And like they had like, I think they found the CIA went to like basically they tracked different locations that they went to, and then different things they bought at like stores and stuff, and that's how they proved their theory and everything. But yeah, it's just, once again, it's really sad how the government is able to paint a different picture, and they get away with it every time. Like it just really angers me And the war on drugs is just another example of this. And we still see the effects today. I mean, we still see, like I said, people in jail for weed, which is just crazy. Like how is someone in jail for weed when we can, like she said, on any corner, go to a dispensary right now and get weed? Like,
It's there's so much profit coming out of that, but there's someone sitting in jail for either using it themselves or also trying to make profit of it, which thousands of other dispensaries are doing the same thing right now. So
exactly. That's just, yeah, it's crazy how the system works. Mom, were you going to say something? I see you.
Yeah, I've just always had an issue with the war on drugs in general because we give people more time in prison, right? Our people more time in prison for either selling to someone who's making that choice or for being someone who's making a choice for ourselves. They do more time than people that are murdering and raping children, which is a clear sign of systemic issue, right? Because if you statistically look at it, it's white folks. I mean, there's Black people, but statistically, the majority of serial killers are not people of color. Molesters are statistically the majority are not people of color. So they don't focus on giving them the maximum time. They get to get out and reoffend and get out and reoffend. But we put someone who is making a choice for themselves to partake in a substance, a lifetime sentence. It's clearly set up in order to put people of color behind bars permanently.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, like the blurb I read kind of talks about like, I think it's called Stop and Frisk or whatever. I think that was like another way basically. And that's what I'm saying. These things are still like gonna have stains in our systems. If that's how it was once, like that bias just doesn't like get erased once we shift a few words and policy and stuff. Like it's a whole messed up system. Even the justice system, I like how we're touching on that too, because really, if you have enough money, you can get away with anything, I feel like, in our justice system. Like this is just the most hypocritical nation ever because we're supposed to stand on these certain ideals, but then like justice for all, let's be real. No, justice for rich and white. That's what we're talking about. So yeah, I definitely thank you guys so much for bringing up those points. Did anybody have any last points to bring up?
I have one quick, just as an observation. I can't help but tie it to the whole 13th Amendment, all the things that have been brought up, right? So the idea that slavery potentially is abolished by the 13th Amendment only in the it's in except for when it's punishment for a crime. So for me, I look at it like this is our way, our as in the unit USA, of maintaining that system, which is why there is an imbalance in the penalty for the crime, right? Based on your race. And it's just the system of white supremacy, really, that continues to keep some form of slavery, quote unquote, alive by having basically two different sets of rules.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for tying that in because for sure, it's like this book says, the new Jim Crow. It's a new way to enslave, obviously in a lot different way, but still enslave like the Black population and a lot the Hispanic population. So thank you so much. Definitely agree. And yeah, that documentary on Netflix also talks about the 13th Amendment a lot. I think it's literally called 13. So again, recommend that one too. Anything else to add from anybody? No. Okay, well, feel free to stay for the video. Let me get that link in the chat so that if you can't stay, it is a 2-hour video and I would recommend the whole thing, but I'm only going to show 45 minutes because those really hit the points that we're talking about. But I still would recommend finishing it. Let me get it. I'm surprised I made it through this Zoom without coughing. I've been sick and my cough is horrendous. So I'm glad I made it through. And that's the video for anybody that wants to watch it later. And let me know if I have audio issues because I know I sometimes have those.
October the 7th, 1994, Sarah McClendon, the senior White House news correspondent who has covered 11 presidential administrations, beginning with that of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, demonstrated once again that she has the courage to ask the hardball questions other journalists only dare to think. As she confronted William Jefferson Clinton about the Central Intelligence Agency's involvement in nefarious activities set at a remote airport in western Arkansas while Clinton was Arkansas's commander-in-chief, he finally cornered the man who was a co-conspirator in bypassing the Constitution of the United States of America. In doing so, the president was not only forced to address the looming scandal that may impeach him, Clinton once again demonstrated his trademark talent. He lied.
Sir, the Republicans are trying to blame you for the existence of a small air base at Mena, Arkansas. This base was set up by George Bush and Oliver North and the CIA to help the Iran-Contras, and they brought in plane load after plane load of cocaine there for sale in the United States. And then they took the money and bought weapons and took them back to the Contras, all of which was illegal, as you know, under the Rowland Act. But tell me, did they tell you that this had to be in existence because of national security?
Well, let me answer the question. No, they didn't tell me anything about it. They didn't say anything to me about it. The airport in question and all the events in question were the subject of state and federal inquiries. It was primarily a matter for federal jurisdiction. State really had next to nothing to do with it. The local prosecutor did conduct an investigation based on what was within the jurisdiction of state law. The rest of it was under jurisdiction of the United States attorneys who were appointed successively by previous administrations. We had nothing, zero to do with it. And everybody who's ever looked into it knows that.
Polk County Prosecutor Charles Blake, the man who initially attempted to investigate the Mena, Arkansas criminal activities, would surely take exception to Mr. Clinton's assertion that, quote, the local prosecutor did conduct an investigation based on what was within the jurisdiction of the state law, end quote. In fact, it was Blake who went directly to then Governor Clinton to seek funding for his investigation, seeing as how rural Polk County lacked the financial resources to deal with the CIA.
When it became apparent that nothing was going to be done on the federal level, that's when I began more actively pursuing it.
Prosecutor Black, a Clinton supporter, met with the governor and handed him a letter requesting money for a state grand jury on Mena.
His response to me was that he would get a man, something to the effect that he would get a man on it and would get word back to me. And I never heard back.
Years later, Clinton said he offered $25,000 to Prosecutor Black's boss to fund a grand jury. But Charles Black and his boss claimed they never heard about any offer of money from Governor Clinton.
I believe Bill Clinton's an honest, respectable man, and I have to believe that he did that. But the fact is, I never got that word myself.
Blake wasn't the only man affected by uncooperative superiors who, for some strange reason, seemed willing to turn a blind eye to blatant disregard for America's laws. William Duncan, a senior IRS Criminal Intelligence Division investigator, was running headlong into invisible walls that were protecting what appeared to be an open wound in the Department of Justice.
How far will the United States government go to protect an operation? Will they kill a case? I think history has shown that that can happen. Did it happen? In my opinion, yes.
Duncan, through the Arkansas Attorney General's office, desperately sought funding to continue his investigation into the dark corners of the CIA's activities in Arkansas. But just as Prosecutor Blake had earlier experienced, Bill Clinton wouldn't help. The purse strings funding justice were drawn tight. So Clinton's response to Sarah McClendon about, quote, the state really had next to nothing to do with it, end quote, was another lie. The state, under Clinton's control, helped seal the fate of the MENA scandal by not funding a proper investigation. Even more shocking, when law enforcement failed to shield the citizens of Arkansas from the federal government's reckless disregard for the sovereignty of the state and its laws, a citizens group known as the Arkansas Committee gathered thousands of signatures and went directly to Clinton, demanding he lead the investigation. The results of the civilian effort? Continued lies, deceit, and cover-up. What forces could be responsible for compromising the entire system of justice? Bill Clinton certainly knows. He was the governor of Arkansas who allowed the subversion of his state government by the shadowy forces radiating from the Reagan-Bush White House, when ex-CIA Director William Casey began using the CIA to illegally conduct secret foreign policy. This serious breach of America's constitutional authority was labeled by the media as Iran-Contra. This documentary will rewrite this dark period in American history and leave you with annoying questions. Who or what is running this country? Gun running. Mysterious CIA flights. Contra military training. Guerrilla pilot training. Clandestine airdrops. Tons of illegal drugs. Millions of dollars in dirty money. Covert activity in some third world banana republic, right? Wrong. Arkansas, America's own banana republic.
The cost of living an exciting life is high. You can't sit in Baton Rouge and go to work from 9 to 5 on Monday through Friday and go to the LSU football games on Saturday night and church on Sunday morning and have an exciting life. That may be exciting to 99% of the population, but to me, it's not. And the exciting thing in life to me is to get into a life-threatening situation. Now that's excitement.
That was the voice of the late Adler Berryman Steele, pilot extraordinaire, soldier of fortune, drug smuggler, undercover agent for the FBI, DEA, U.S. Customs, and the Central Intelligence Agency. Barry Seal, who was ruthlessly assassinated in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in February 1986, plays a pivotal role, along with his C-123K military transport plane he affectionately named the Fat Lady, in chronicling the true history of Iran-Contra. This story is about unmasking the deception that was perpetuated upon the American people at a time in the mid-1980s when a small backward state, Arkansas, became the epicenter of a CIA-like operation designed to do an end run around congressional law. A blank operation being backdoored out of the Reagan-Bush White House and set in place in rural western Arkansas under the watchful eyes of then Governor William Jefferson Clinton. We will expose the ongoing cover-up, which has now spanned 3 presidential administrations, a cover-up designed to keep the American people in the dark about the unthinkable, that trafficking in cocaine is justified in the pursuit of national security, and foreign policy. This documentary is presented from two unique perspectives. From the outside through the eyes of numerous journalists, news organizations, and researchers constituting more than an 8-year effort to get to the truth surrounding the CIA's use of Western Arkansas as a staging area for deniable covert activities. And told from the inside through a man who survived the MENA connection and who now, at great personal risk, is willing to set the record straight about the inner workings of the CIA's off-the-shelf, self-sustaining, standalone project known as the Enterprise. This intelligence insider, Terry Reed, has written a best-selling book, Compromised: Clinton, Bush, and the CIA, detailing the inner workings of Ronald Reagan's backdoor foreign policy, mislabeled Iran-Contra by the media. Terry will join us later in this documentary to lead us through this maze of deceit that was the brainchild of George Herbert Walker Bush and which compromised Bill Clinton. So what were Barry Seal's CIA assigned tasks at MENA? First, the Contras needed guns. Arkansas's National Guard armories had most of the component parts in inventory from which to build guns. All that was lacking was to enlist the manufacturing services of a small clandestine group of trusted Arkansas manufacturing companies, and the recipe would be complete. They would build the critical gun parts that, by law, produce a paper trail from the manufacturer to the end user. Only in this case, per CIA instructions, there would be no serial number stamped into the parts and no documentation created to leave an embarrassing trail. Untraceable weapons would seemingly appear from nowhere, and Barry Seal would then fly the munitions to staging areas in Central America with the help of his CIA-provided C-123 cargo plane, the Fat Lady, which had a gross weight capability of 60,000 pounds. Second, the Contras needed skilled pilots trained in the risky and often deadly business of flying slow and heavily laden cargo planes behind enemy lines for the purpose of resupplying the Contra soldiers on the ground in Nicaragua. As we had learned in Vietnam, guerrilla warfare depends upon a continuous supply of munitions, medical supplies, and food being provided to the foot soldier on the ground. The CIA's Enterprise, based in Honduras, had already procured the planes such as the C-123 Provider and the C-7 Caribou. But potentially catastrophic risks were being taken by piloting the planes with American crews. If an accident or a shoot-down did occur, the CIA would have built-in deniability if the planes were piloted by Nicaraguan nationals who were simply trying to liberate their country from the jaws of communism. Being an FAA-certified flight instructor, Terry Reed's role with respect to the Contra pilot training was to train the students in multi-engine low-level operations, giving special emphasis to aerial cargo delivery techniques at night, while in hostile fire environments. Third, Seal was tasked with flying the necessary cash back to Arkansas to sustain the operation. All of the sources of Seal's cash are not yet known. However, a large amount has been traced to the Drug Enforcement Administration in Florida. It appears the DEA was funding the MENA operation with cash seized during drug raids.
Were there Contras who relied on the profits of narcotics in order to buy arms and to survive? Yes.
It is easy to see how the entire MENA enterprise could evolve into ex-CIA Director Bill Casey's mandate to develop an
Off-the-shelf, self-sustaining, standalone entity that could perform certain activities on behalf of the United States.
But what developed as a result of Barry Seal building the machinery to launder unauthorized government money will likely emerge as a money laundering scandal, the likes of which this country has never seen. Back in the summer of 1987, a young television journalist named Teresa Dickey was covering Western Arkansas for Channel 5 out of Fort Smith, a city located 100 miles north of MENA. Well, Miss Dickey had discovered something very strange indeed was or had been going on in and around the MENA airport. Years earlier, the townspeople of MENA had welcomed with open arms and much fanfare the arrival of huge military C-130 aircraft. This was perceived as a boom for the rural Mena economy. Little did the townspeople realize the Central Intelligence Agency had just selected Mena as the staging area for an unauthorized clandestine operation. Initially, Dickey thought that perhaps he was witnessing the results of then Governor Bill Clinton's aggressive industry recruitment program, a recruitment program designed to drag Arkansas beyond its hillbilly, corncob pipe, and moonshine image by luring out-of-state businesses into Arkansas through promises of state-backed low-interest loan, nearly free land and buildings, coupled with huge tax incentives. Jobs for Arkansans was the young governor's pledge, and Dickey, at first, thought maybe Clinton's plan was working. Bill Clinton's industry recruitment plan had worked all right. Its purpose was to attract industry. But what it had attracted and recruited was the CIA, and along with it, covert operations which had been banned by the United States Congress. But what was peculiar about the Mena airport was the level of sophistication found in all sorts of aircraft maintenance operations situated alongside Mena's single north-south runway. Not to mention that remote Mena was the home of only 5,000 people. High-tech aircraft overhaul facilities located deep in a densely wooded region of the Ouachita Mountain Range. Businesses drawing from a labor pool not normally associated with skilled technicians. Well, all of this made Dickey suspicious. So what had Dickey found in that isolated little burg known as Mena, Arkansas, a town with no four-lane highway access? A town where everyone either knew each other or was related. A town that was harboring a deep, dark secret. The aftermath of a large-scale CIA-like operation that was soon to have a very bright light shone upon it. What had triggered Dickey's suspicion was the extensive security barring access to the airport, as well as the presence of a sea of very large airplanes. Airplanes bearing new paint jobs, foreign registrations, and markings from cities situated long distances from tiny Mena. This prompted her to interview a series of individuals who owned or operated aircraft modification and overhaul facilities at the Mena airport. Dickey focused immediately on why the need for such elaborate security, which included the use of employee ID badges. George Reeb, the owner of a shop that had retrofitted CIA aircraft, responded as follows.
Well, you have to tighten up security whenever you're around aircraft because of the safety factor. And I think it's a good idea because, you know, since we're growing so fast, a lot of times you're not familiar with all your employees. And if you have badges, you can distinguish who's an employee and who's an employee for another company on the field. With someone coming in to look around, and you can't quite have that.
When asked why he had relocated to Mena from Maryland, Reeb responded.
Well, I worked for Fokker Aircraft at the time and was handling used aircraft. And one of the customers told me about Mena, Arkansas, to have aircraft refurbished, and I never heard of Mena, Arkansas before.
Dickey inquired about Mena's customer base, and Reeb provided.
Had an airplane last week, leave for Australia. 1 week prior to that to Australia. We have 2 more coming that are going to Australia. We send 50 euro. Over the world.
Reeb's response about refurbishing aircraft from as far away as Australia should have alerted Dickey that something was amiss. The operating cost to fly a large airplane from Australia to Mena would far exceed any savings realized by having work performed in rural Arkansas. Dickey was then able to penetrate the security of Rich Mountain Aviation, the CIA's primary facility at Mena, the very one that had been used by Barry Seal's organization. Dickey was able to film both Fred Hampton Jr. and Joseph Neville Evans, Seal's trusted mechanics, both of whom were assets of the CIA and DEA. Dickey then interviewed Fred Hampton, and again, the discussion centered on the need for elaborate security.
Security fence? Well, that was something we put up probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago. We put it up in anticipation of our first inspection by the military. being that these are their aircraft and they are used as part of this missile defense system in the Marshall Islands.
This was obviously a cover story. Dickey would later discover that office employees of Rich Mountain had been asked to believe concocted cover stories as well. This went as far as one secretary being told that one of Barry Seal's planes had been modified to haul porpoises. Dickey's suspicions solidified into reality a few months later. Through the Iran-Contra hearings in Washington, a connection had been made between the Contras and the MENA operation. This prompted Dickey to dig back into the history of the government's clandestine involvement with Rich Mountain Aviation, a company that was surfacing as one that had performed strange modifications to CIA aircraft. A central figure was also emerging, a man named Adler Berryman Seal.
This is Barry Seal, a highly publicized drug smuggler originally operating out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Since 1978, he carried out one of the largest drug smuggling operations between the United States and Central America. In the spring of 1982, Louisiana State Police warned Seal that they would tail him wherever he went in efforts to stop his operation. It's believed that Seal decided to move his operation out of that state after the warning. It was here at Rich Mountain Aviation that authorities believed Barry Seal moved his operation. Terry Capehart owned a business at the MENA airport, and he remembers when he first met Barry Seal in 1981.
Of course, I didn't know who Barry Seals was. I'd never heard of the man. And Freddie introduced me to him.
Capehart didn't know of Seal's drug background then, but remembers that this man, Joe Evans, former partner of Freddie Hampton, brought in one of Seal's planes to Rich Mountain Aviation. Evans declined to comment for TV5 News, saying it's his policy to, quote, keep quiet, unquote. Capehart said he began to see more and more of Barry Seal, especially after the spring of 1982. He didn't suspect anything until the Polk County Sheriff called him in with some troubling information.
I came in possession of some information that indicated some aircraft being serviced and stored on the airport here was being used in an illegal international operation.
Capehart then began noticing some alterations to Barry Seal's aircraft that he says are common to drug smugglers.
That I seen myself, Freddie and Dwayne Hill, which was an employee of Rich Mountain Aviation, changed the end number on one of the airplanes so that they were both identical. And then the aircraft made a flight. If they got caught or somebody was on them or turned the end number in, they can just take the tape, yank it off the airplane's set and say in Louisiana, wherever. DA or an agency comes up and asks about it, they'll say, hey, this is not the end number. That airplane's sitting in Mena, Arkansas inside the hangar.
A former employee of Rich Mountain Aviation also saw unusual modifications and was given far-fetched reasons for them.
What Joe had told me that it was going to be used to transport porpoises on. And the other guy just kind of looked at Joe and said, that's a good one.
Well,
Former Sheriff Hadaway says he had plenty of evidence to prove a conspiracy, but in 1984, Seal became an informant for the Federal Drug Enforcement Agency. It was then that the sheriff was told to halt his investigation into Seal and Rich Mountain Aviation. 2 years later, Seal was murdered by Colombian hitmen for his role as an informant. The grand jury is expected to look into the activities of Barry Seal at Mena Airport prior to 1984. Local investigators believe they have a strong case, but have wondered why it's taken so long to come to court. Tomorrow night will show how the covert smuggling of arms to Contra rebels in Nicaragua may have slowed down one aspect of drug investigations by local authorities.
As Dickey just noted, her investigation was now turning up evidence that Mena had been a staging area for arms shipments to Central America. Isn't it interesting that a freshman journalist like Dickey was already making the Mena connection? As the Iran-Contra hearing in Washington raged on, the teams of seasoned federal investigators should have been following Dickey because she had also made the Fat Lady connection as well. To smuggle arms to Nicaragua from the Mena airport required not only a skilled pilot like Barry Seal, but also a large military transport plane. Dickey had learned that Barry Seal's CIA provided C-123K military cargo plane had been based at Rich Mountain Aviation, and this caused her to file part 2 of a series.
This man, the late Barry Seal, was a known drug smuggler whom authorities believed moved his drug smuggling base of operation from Baton Rouge, Louisiana to Mena, Arkansas in 1982. In 1984, he parked this plane at Rich Mountain Aviation at Mena's airport.
I know that one time, Mr. Seals was working in it and he had some ropes around it. And we were instructed not to go near the plane while Mr. Seals was in there working.
Was informed that this aircraft had been used to smuggle some cocaine into the United States. Then subsequent to that, some information that it may have been used to in an operation that was used to embarrass the Nicaraguan government.
With this information, the former sheriff sought a court order to confiscate the plane in June of 1984. Everything was lined up, but then he received a telephone call from a drug enforcement agency supervisor from Miami named Robert Jara.
He finally disclosed to me and asked me not to confiscate the airplane, told me that if I did, that I would just be ordered to give it back to him, that in fact, the DEA did have a large financial interest in the aircraft.
At this point, Hadaway's investigation into Barry Seal's drug smuggling activities at Rich Mountain Aviation came to a screeching halt. 6 months later, Seal's plane left Mena. The next time the sheriff heard about it, it had crashed in Nicaragua during a gun-running mission to the Contra rebels. Hadaway's run-in with the DEA would have gone unnoticed, except for an April 1987 broadcast on CBS at West 57th Street called The CIA Connection, Drugs for Guns.
Do you really believe the government decided to get into the drug business in order to pay for the Contra? The American government.
As incredulous as it may sound, I believe that not only decided to get into it, I think orchestrated the whole thing.
And need more now. Read off the bed. Good. There you go.
These 2 Fort Smith men saw the story and were discussing it in a local bar. An assistant U.S. attorney overheard their conversation and told him his office was working on a case just like that.
He mentioned that their office had a case and that in the process of that, they had contacted some people in Florida for some assistance. And then another agency in Florida had contacted their office and told them to drop the case to get off of it.
Bothers me. The fact that a competent attorney's office could be restrained from doing its job that's what bothers me.
These men also say the attorney said the case in question involved Barry Seal activities in the Mena area. The Congressional Subcommittee on Crime has now begun its own investigation into the Mena connection. Tomorrow night, we'll show you how a probe into a money laundering scheme in Mena seems to have gone nowhere.
Drugs, guns, money laundering, cover-up. The CIA's Mena connection appeared to be reaching critical mass. A federal grand jury was preparing to expose the whole seedy affair. Dickey was following a trail she probably thought would lead to a Pulitzer Prize in investigative journalism. Here she was in rural western Arkansas, covering a federal grand jury proceeding that was destined to prove that the CIA had not only violated congressional law by shipping arms to the Contras, but had also allowed their Black Operations aircraft to transport cocaine into the United States.
The issue of a drug smuggling conspiracy revolves around this convicted drug smuggler, the late Barry Seal. Former SEAL pilots spoke at a grand jury this week about whether their former boss had moved his operation from Baton Rouge, Louisiana to Rich Mountain Aviation in Mena, Arkansas. One pilot who testified told TV5 News Rich Mountain Aviation was simply used by Barry Seal, and Seal didn't involve the company in his drug smuggling activities. But a couple years ago, other witnesses testified at a grand jury about another possible aspect of this conspiracy, money laundering. And nothing happened. Catherine Gann used to work as a secretary for Freddie Hampton of Rich Mountain Aviation. She says she handled lots of cash for her boss, but sometimes in an extraordinary manner.
I was told to deposit the large amounts of cash in amounts of less than $10,000. Even if we had $15,000 or $20,000, I would go to 2 separate banks and deposit less than 10,000 at one bank and less than 10,000 at another.
What she's talking about is money laundering or structuring deposits to avoid filling out one of these Internal Revenue Service forms called a currency transaction report.
I asked Fred Hampton why he wanted me to deposit it this way, and he said, IRS won't get this. We won't have to pay taxes on it.
Union Bank of Neenah is one of the banks that Kathy Gann was told to deposit large amounts of cash. One Union Bank employee told TV5 News that on one occasion, a former bank official divided the cash for Rich Mountain Aviation and personally went to different tellers and had each of them deposit $10,000 into the Rich Mountain Aviation account. Catherine Gann gave testimony to an IRS agent about the illegal practice, but found that when she appeared before a grand jury, it asked no questions about the money laundering.
When I left there, I was wondering, as I walked down the hall, I wondered, well, why did they bring me up here?
In the meantime, the fact that she gave testimony has caused her to live in fear.
I kept waiting and waiting to hear from somebody, and I was scared all this time. I didn't know what was going to happen to me. And, I knew that his truck had been outside my house. I was scared for my girls.
People close to this issue wonder why such a cut and dried case failed to produce indictments. The former Polk County Sheriff has lost faith in the process of justice.
Do not have a great deal of confidence in the function of the federal criminal justice system at this time.
But even if this grand jury fails to produce any indictments, other law enforcement officials say they will continue their separate investigation. In Neenah, I'm Teresa Dickey reporting for the News People.
You were probably wondering, how many indictments did the Fort Smith grand jury hand up? Answer, none. But Dickey noted that several other law enforcement officials were committed to continuing their investigations into the Mena connection if the grand jury bore no fruit. And investigate they did. In fact, their efforts triggered the interest of out-of-state media.
Neenah is a town of patriots and pickups, a town of 5,000 in the mountains of western Arkansas, a place that would seem as far away from American foreign policy as a place could get. And yet, one little airport on the southern edge of town is managing to raise questions that extend far beyond the city limits.
1,000 miles away from Neenah, here in Washington, there are investigators for both the House and the Senate who would like to know what's going on at that little airport in western Arkansas.
As Oliver North's public battle over government secrets and the illegal supply of weapons to the Nicaraguan Contras is waged in Washington, congressional investigators in recent months have tried to learn if Mena, Arkansas was an illegal staging area for shipping guns to the U.S.-backed Contra rebels. This is a strange story. The facts already known are bizarre enough. What Unit 5 has been able to learn makes this story stranger still. It all begins in 1982, when this man, Adler Berryman Seal, showed up in Mena, Arkansas.
My top load paid me $1.5 million for a single trip.
Barry Seal was a drug smuggler, an extraordinary multi-million-dollar-a-year drug smuggler, who with the help of several associates kept and serviced his drug planes in a hangar at the Mena airport. Those planes, according to investigators, were illegally modified with extra fuel tanks and instruments in order to fly long-distance drug missions to Central and South America. Barry Seal paid his associates for those modifications with tens of thousands of dollars in cash. Money, which according to investigators, was illegally laundered by Seal's associates at banks in Mena.
Yeah, I'm pleading guilty.
But when Barry Seal was finally caught in 1984, investigators for the FBI, the IRS, and other agencies of law enforcement were told little or nothing about a special deal he had made with the Federal Drug Task Force headed by then Vice President George Bush. The deal? The government kept Barry Seal out of jail, and in exchange, Seal became a drug informant and helped put in jail some of his own associates in the international drug trade. But that wasn't all that Barry Seal did. Russell Welch, criminal investigator for the Arkansas State Police. Did Barry Seal ever say to you, I work for the CIA?
He said he was had worked for the CIA.
Unit 5 has learned in the early 1980s, even before his arrest, Seal had bought one of his planes from a CIA front, Air America. The plane was used by Seal for drug smuggling, and the CIA company was paid in the traditional drug dealer fashion of $300,000 in cash.
According to this confidential FBI teletype obtained by Unit 5, one of SEAL's associates said he was maintaining SEAL's aircraft at the Mena airport for the CIA. So what was Barry Seal actually doing?
One federal agent under very strict confidence told me that it was assumed within his agency, Barry Seal was carrying guns to Central American Exchange and bringing drugs back on a free ride.
Russell Welch of the Arkansas State Police was one of dozens of investigators who for years had been tracking Barry Seal and his associates. As these documents obtained by Unit 5 indicate, the FBI, the IRS, Customs, and the Attorney General of Louisiana formed just a partial list of those who wanted some answers. They didn't get them. Internal FBI documents indicate investigators were told not to look into any of Seal's activities that occurred before his 1984 plea agreement. So, blocked from seeking indictments against Seal, investigators sought indictments against Seal's associates at the Mena airport for allegedly aiding in the drug smuggling and for alleged IRS violations. So far, no indictments have been produced. At the end of this year, the statute of limitations will run out on those alleged crimes. As for Barry Seal, time ran out in 1986 when he was assassinated in Louisiana by Colombian drug dealers. Some of Seal's secrets died with him, but some of those secrets today remain guarded by the National Security Council, the agency for which Oliver North worked. The NSC has blocked a recent congressional request to examine the relationship of drug smuggling to American foreign policy in Central America.
As a citizen, America didn't get stay in court.
Chicago journalist Carol Moran unearthed a whole new facet of the Mena operation. As her investigation continued, she connected the dots from Mena to Washington and discovered that a major portion of Oliver North's Contra assistance program took place in a wooded mountainous region north of the Mena airport. Watch part 2 of Moran's special.
Angola, where the United States has supported rebels against the Marxist government. South Africa, where the United States has walked a tightrope between the minority white government and the majority black population. Central America, where the United States has tried to overthrow the leftist government of Nicaragua and prop up the centrist government of El Salvador. 3 critical areas for U.S. foreign policy that seem very distant from the concerns of a small community in Western Arkansas, but maybe not. Mena, Arkansas is a small town in the mountains along the Arkansas-Oklahoma border. It has no interstate highway. It takes some effort to get here. But some people, some very interesting people in recent years apparently made that effort.
I don't think that there's really anything that we can pin down about them. I believe there's truth in every story.
The rumors and gossip surround 2 small airfields. The first is the Mena Airport, where this giant C-130 military cargo plane, tail number N4469P, arrived one day last year. It is a huge plane for a small airport, a plane that originally belonged to the Royal Australian Air Force. Curiously, around the same time, a group of Australians arrived to work at the airport, telling investigators like Russell Welch of the Arkansas State Police some strange things. You've spoken with some of the Australians at the airport, correct?
Yes.
And some of them have told you they're part of a CIA operation.
Yes, it didn't seem to be too much of a secret.
An Australian at that time told Welch the C-130 would soon be on its way to Angola, mission undisclosed. Unit 5 has learned of 2 current federal probes at the airport. U.S. Customs in Houston is investigating possible violations of the Neutrality Act, whether or not this plane, considered to be a weapon of war, might be on its way into the hands of South Africa. The second investigation by Arkansas Congressman Bill Alexander probes, among other things, whether or not the CIA within the past year and a half contracted with various partners to transport arms to Central America, allowing them to bring drugs back to Mena with distribution in Miami or New York. The mayor of Mena, Jerry Montgomery, doesn't believe any of it.
That's hard for me to believe that Mena, Arkansas was used.
But there's more. Down a winding dirt road, back in the mountains where even the locals can get lost, resides yet another mystery. Now, this landing strip is a curious thing. It exists in an isolated mountain valley in the middle of nowhere when there already is an airport just 11 miles from here. So why was 2,700 feet of runway installed here? Why was this landing strip built? And what was it built for? One person who thinks he knows the answer is Gene Wheaton, a former criminal investigator for the U.S. Army, who has done his own investigation.
They were training pilots to make night flights and takeoffs and landings of strips that had no lighting, no air control, so forth.
Wheaton's deposition came last year in an unsuccessful civil lawsuit against Oliver North and other principals in the Iran-Contra scandal. Oliver North won that battle and now in Washington fights the criminal charges against him. It is a fight over what government secrets should stay secret. In some ways, on a smaller scale, that's the same battle going on in Mena, Arkansas, where investigators from a variety of agencies for a number of years have asked questions of the government and have received few answers. The people of Mena themselves continue to debate whether or not their small town has some ongoing role in American foreign policy.
I don't see how it could have been kept a secret. There are definite fishy things going on, and there's a lot of cover up.
So, in the mid to late 1980s, news of the Mena connection spilled forth. This may lead one to wonder if the media simply dropped the Mena story after the aftermath of the Iran-Contra scandal died down. Quite the opposite. Time and time again, the story would leap into the headlines of predominantly Arkansas newspapers. Arkansas journalists, law enforcement officials, and citizens groups would try in vain to advance the investigations, but an invisible force seemed to be keeping the lid on Arkansas's Pandora's box. Then, in 1992, during the presidential campaign, after the name of Bill Clinton was thrust into the mainstream media, a renewed interest in Mena surfaced as throngs of journalists rushed to Little Rock to investigate the obscure young governor who was seeking the Democratic Party's nomination. Countless reporters dug, probed, and pried into the layers of lies, deceit, and distortions that by then effectively interred Mena's dark secrets. Russell Welch of the Arkansas State Police and Bill Duncan, by then an investigator with the Arkansas Attorney General's office, were interviewed time and time again as the media slowly began to understand that a large-scale, high-profile CIA operation had in fact taken place on Arkansas soil on Bill Clinton's watch as governor. Arkansas Democratic Congressman Bill Alexander renewed his efforts to get the truth out. The truth that even he had been stonewalled as his office attempted to dissect the Mena story. Then, in April of 1992, as the pressure cooker containing the Mena scandal seemed ready to burst, with the resulting steam most assuredly scalding Bill Clinton and destroying his political career, Time magazine came to the rescue. Time's full-page story, which savagely attacked the credibility of Terry Reid and ridiculed nearly everyone associated with the Mena investigation, effectively nailed the lid once again on the CIA's box of dirty secrets. What the Time article failed to tell the reader, however, was Time's investigative journalist Richard Behar, who wrote the story Anatomy of a Smear, was actually in Arkansas helping to undermine the investigative efforts of other credible journalists. Behar had discovered that the news magazine The Nation was actually corroborating portions of Terry Reid's story concerning weapons parts manufacturing. Through a liable suit in federal court launched by Terry Reid against Time magazine, the following tape-recorded conversation was obtained. In it, Behar is conversing with Bill Clinton's friend Webster Hubbell, who was then working with Hillary Clinton at the Rose Law Firm in Little Rock. In the tape, Behar is alerting Hubbell of an active media investigation into Hubbell's father-in-law's manufacturing company, EOM, in Russellville, Arkansas. Behar is warning Hubbell that his brother-in-law, Skeeter Ward, is divulging classified information to the magazine The Nation. Remember, according to CIA insider Terry Reid, it was POM on the surface a manufacturer of parking meters who was building weapons parts for the CIA through an agreement with Ivers Johnson Firearms, a CIA proprietary company situated in Jacksonville, Arkansas.
Well, listen, can I make a recommendation to you off the record? And this is particularly one of these guys to know that on this story. Seems to me a little bit. The Nation newspaper. Apparently, it's heard through the grapevine. They had an interview with Skeeter. They talk about that. And supposedly, Skeeter told them that you guys have done exit cones on nuclear weapons. BLM. He wouldn't have said that. He knows better. Well, that's just the thing. Yeah. I don't know why it would come back to me to, a nuclear weapon. Yeah. Unless the story's taking a life of its own. Yeah. What you may want to do is give a ring to the nation. Yeah. And speak to whoever's doing the story and clear it up before they put it in their damn newspaper. Yeah. You didn't hear it from me, and I appreciate it. I really do.
So why did Time magazine use its vast resources to protect Bill Clinton? Maybe the fact that Bill Clinton's friend and former Oxford roommate, Rube Talbot, who was then Time's editor-at-large, played a role. Did Mr. Talbot receive a reward for short-circuiting the investigation? The perception is certainly there. Mr. Talbot joined the Clinton administration in 1993 and is now the #2 man in the Department of State. Is it possible that an organization that's perceived as credible as Time magazine is in effect under the control of the CIA? A CIA investigator supplying sworn testimony for the Reed versus Time libel suit after being asked to evaluate Time's article on Mina said in an affidavit he believed the article was an obvious disinformation tool.
All right, so that's all I'm going to show of the video. It obviously unpacked a lot. Obviously, also the CIA bringing in weapons as well. And I don't know if you guys have seen the show Snowfall, but now it's kind of taken on a different life, more for entertainment. But the beginning season show, that's kind of like what it's based on. Oh, I got a message, sorry. But it's based on how the government did bring in these drugs and weapons into poor Black neighborhoods. And so it's a really good show. Obviously, it's for entertainment purposes, so it can't be 100% credible, but it definitely touches on this topic. And so, yeah, I would recommend that. Also, like I said, please do finish that video because it unpacks so much and it provides different evidence and support. Did anybody have any last thoughts before we close out today? Alrighty, well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video and the discussion today. It's one that's always relevant and that can easily be talked about forever, just like our other ones like colorism and stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much for joining, and I will end the recording.